Hi everyone, I've got a quick update for you today on the status of the Washington Bridge replacement project and demolition that's going on right now. In this video, I've got updated drone footage, I've got some boat footage, and I really want to thank those of you there locally. There's virtually an army of people that are supplying me with tips, photos, videos, drone flight footage, and it's fantastic and I think it's needed. You know, I plan to continue doing stories about this bridge because I think it's really necessary and important, particularly in light of some criticisms I have of the local media that I'll get into later in this video. So in this video, I'll cover the current status of the demolition work. I'm going to cover the results of the weigh in motion system, showing you the number of vehicles, the number of overweight trucks, and put that into context with other aspects of the existing eastbound bridge. It's now carrying 6 lanes of traffic when it was designed for 5. I'm also going to talk about the status of the structural health monitoring system. That system was supposed to go hand in glove with the weigh in motion system so that if an overweight truck went over, the Rhode Island DOT had an opportunity to see in real time if there were any detrimental effects to the bridge. So I'm going to cover that as well. So let's go through some of this recent drone footage. This was recorded July 29th by Josh from Providence. See traffic moving along. This is in the late afternoon. See they've got all these buoys set up around the remaining pier substructures that they're demolishing. They were able to start that in-water work after July 1st. So they're just getting into it, but you can see there's some of these pier locations where you don't see anything sticking out above the water. So those pier caps and presumably the upper few feet of the piling have been removed, although I don't have any confirmation that they've got into the piling yet. Let's look at some of this boat footage. This was collected on July 27th by Chris. I believe he's local to Providence there, but certainly he was at this bridge location on a Sunday, so nothing was going on. He was able to get in there and get some great shots for me, which I really appreciate. See all this debris that's being set on the barges. These are spudded barges, so they can be pushed off the channel bottom and provide a very stable work platform, as opposed to a barge that's just merely floating. And they've got these buoys to collect any sediment that may be disturbed from the channel bottom due to all this activity. All right, so to really jump into things here, I've mentioned this July 13th op-ed by an engineer who was formerly involved with the design and construction of the Westbound Washington Bridge, the bridge that's now being demolished. And RiDOT has responded to some of Mr. Sigmund's comments and criticisms, and they haven't done it in a very professional or transparent way, in my opinion, and I'm going to go through that. So I'm recording this video on July 31st, 2025. This video on the YouTube site for WPRI Channel 12 in Providence was posted yesterday. It's an interview with RiDOT Director Peter Alviti. I'm just going to play the whole segment here, and then I'm going to replay it, pointing out what I think should have been addressed.
There was a pretty scathing op-ed in the Providence Journal by an engineer who worked on the Washington Bridge when it was originally built back in the 60s. And he said that there's been some evidence to him that made it obvious that the break that we've talked about many times that caused the emergency shutdown of the westbound span happened a long time ago, and that the DOT is misleading the public. I want you to respond to that. Did you mislead the public?
So opinions, there are a lot of opinions, you know, on this, right? And this particular engineer, a retired engineer, has certain opinions of it. There are other engineers that have opinions of the design that he did, calling his design bizarre and some of the design elements ticking bombs, the way it was designed. The one thing we know for sure, there are a couple of things we know for sure. We don't use that design anymore. We've got 1,100 bridges in Rhode Island. That's the only bridge that was designed that way.
I want to talk to you about truck tolls. We've talked about truck tolls before.
Time to talk about truck tolls, apparently. I mean, I'm going to go through this step by step, but that's a perfect example where Alviti doesn't answer the question, doesn't even come close. There's no follow-up from this reporter here. It just goes unchallenged, and I see this time and again. And, you know, I'll say I think there's some great reporting going on there. There's some bright spots. I think the most aggressive reporting relative to RiDOT's nonsense in the Washington Bridge, in my opinion, has come from the Providence Journal as well as PBS Rhode Island. And again, there are people out there trying, but if taken as a whole, these questions posed to the RiDOT officials or Governor McKee relative to the Washington Bridge largely go unchallenged. Then they go largely unfact-checked. It puts me in mind of kabuki theater, or a more modern example would be professional wrestling. In professional wrestling, everybody has their clearly defined role. The conflict seems real, yet the outcomes are preordained. And I can imagine that if you're a local reporter and you're given the opportunity to interview Director Alviti or Governor McKee, and you ask persistent, difficult questions as vindictive and petty as I think both Alviti and McKee are relative to the Washington Bridge issues, I have no doubt that access would be denied to these people for future interviews. But what I want to point out here is virtually anything I see online, because I don't live in Providence, so these stories I see come from the news media in either print, websites, that is for me, or on YouTube. And the dominant channels are WJAR and WPRI. I don't recall seeing a news story. Well, I'm not including PBS Rhode Island in this. I've seen a lot of their work and I think it's great. But I haven't seen anything from the other news stations. So I have to think that most of the viewership is associated with Channel 10 and Channel 12 there in Providence, Rhode Island. So if reporters get together internally and just say, look, we're going to start holding these people to account and let the government officials threaten withdrawal of access, what are they going to do? Where are they going to go to get their message out? They love coming on these programs because they establish a false narrative in most instances, in my opinion, which goes unchallenged, and then it's just thrown out there for mass consumption for the locals. Now, many locals aren't buying it, I can tell you that, based on the comments and the interactions I've had with people. But it's just kind of all for show, really, if you want to think of it that way. I'm still grateful they're doing the interviews. I can use it for source material, but it's frustrating from an accountability and transparency standpoint, in my view. So let's go through in detail some of the nonsense that Alviti spouted here in this interview.
So opinions, there are a lot of opinions, you know, on this, right? And this particular engineer, a retired engineer.
Okay, why did he have to make the distinction that he's a retired engineer? There's a subtle, maybe not so subtle suggestion that, hey, if it was a practicing engineer, okay, that would be different. And if that happened, I'm a practicing engineer and I've been critical of them. I'm not licensed in Rhode Island. I don't live in Rhode Island. I'm not doing engineering relative to the Washington Bridge. So they've dismissed me in the past as essentially some crank on YouTube that doesn't have to be listened to. And people could decide for themselves whether they want to listen, what my credibility is versus that of, say, Director Alviti's. I'll take that challenge any day.
Has certain opinions of it. There are other engineers that have opinions of the design that he did, calling his design bizarre.
Okay, let's stop there. He said that there were opinions about what happened and the timing with the damage to the bridge, and then he immediately pivots to criticisms of the design. That's not the issue at hand. The question was essentially, how long has this bridge been broken? And I've done previous videos showing satellite imagery. I've shown photos that RiDOT furnished that shows extensive amount of corrosion, necking of these anchor rods. This happened over a very long period of time. And this bridge was broken for at least 2 years before they discovered the issues and shut it down. And it's just ridiculous, I think, how they're trying to control this narrative.
And some of the design elements, ticking bombs, the way it was designed.
Okay, so the bridge was more complicated than it otherwise would have been to accommodate the need for significant architectural enhancements. I've done research on this. It was a beautiful bridge, and the idea was to have it closely appear in a similar fashion to the existing eastbound Washington Bridge. You know, there's been bridges there for over 100 years. So the use of post-tension concrete for structural support of bridges has been used successfully since the 1950s in the United States. And it's a well-established procedure in terms of design and construction. In this case, if you want to think of it as somebody buying a Ferrari, and then they complain that the engine blew up after 50,000 miles, and they never did any oil changes or any other type of maintenance. We know for a fact that RiDOT just completely neglected that bridge. We also know that the issues that they discovered in the aftermath of the observation of the broken anchor rods in terms of issues with the post-tension members, RiDOT knew about that over 30 years ago in 1993, as reported by PBS Rhode Island.
The one thing we know for sure, there are a couple of things we know for sure. We don't use that design anymore. We've got 1,100 bridges in Rhode Island. That's the only bridge that was designed that way.
Complete red herring. What difference does it make? That bridge was designed for that specific location for specific considerations. Now let's go look at some of this other video here, and I've got links in the description to these videos. They're using a hoe ram, a hydraulic impact hammer, to remove the remaining portions of the pile-supported pier for the Westbound Washington Bridge. Now I'm going to play this other news story here about the weigh-in-motion, about the overweight trucks that continue to go over the eastbound Washington Bridge.
For nearly a year now, 6 lanes of traffic have coursed through the remaining part of the Washington Bridge after the old westbound side was shut down. Now we're getting a better idea of how much that bridge is handling as RiDOT releases its first round of results from its Weight in Motion Technology System, or WIM. Governor Dan McKee noted today the data shows a fraction of the trucks going across the Washington Bridge are over the 96,000-pound limit.
It's a very small percentage. It's not having an impact on the safety of the bridge, which is the most important thing for us.
Okay, in this story, they went on to allegations that this whole system is really for revenue generation. So there was no challenge, no follow-up to McKee's statement that, hey, what difference does it make that there's overweight trucks going on over the bridge since it's a small percentage of the overall traffic volume? I mean, that's complete nonsense. He doesn't get into the specifics of, is there damage being inflicted on the bridge? How do they know? They don't have the structural health monitoring system in place. So I'm going to come back to that. But let's stick with the weights for a second. RiDOT has posted the results of this at its weigh-in motion, not weight in motion, as that reporter indicated. And so I plotted up some of these results, and they've been posting data since January 2025. And we got some trend lines here, and you can see that average traffic volume is around 80,000 vehicles a day on each direction of the existing eastbound Washington Bridge. And the trend line is positive, so it shows you an increase in traffic over time, which I suppose you would expect as you go from the winter months into the summer months. And as the governor said, the percentage of the traffic that's overweight, they've reduced their allowable vehicle weight to 96,000 pounds. Yes, it's about 0.05% of the vehicles that are overweight. But again, so what? Let's look at some of these weights. So this is a plot of the heaviest vehicle recorded for a given day in both the east and westbound directions. And you can see that they're routinely having trucks in excess of 120,000 pounds crossing the bridge. In fact, they had one truck that weighed as much as 151,000 pounds. So well over their established weight limit. So I think that's important. I don't think you can just dismiss this as nothing to see here because it's a small percentage of the vehicles. I mean, who would expect that you would have 100% or a high percentage of heavy truck traffic going across a bridge in lieu of vehicle traffic? But again, this is really important because the existing eastbound bridge are on nearly 100-year-old timber pile. They reused the old foundations when they replaced this bridge superstructure in 2008. And each pier is on a few hundred driven timber pile. They only go 30 to 50 feet into the channel deposits. Now, I recently did a video suggesting RiDOT incompetence for not having this structural health monitoring system in place. That is, sensors that tell you, is the bridge being subjected to too high of loading? Is there damage going on? And I've got more information as a result of my APRA request since I've done this video. But let's just go through this very briefly here. RiDOT spent $2.7 million on this weigh in motion and structural health monitoring system because they said it was of critical importance to monitor the condition of the eastbound Washington Bridge. So back in November, both systems should have been completed and operational at the end of October of 2024. So in November, I asked for information about this weigh in motion system and said, well, we can't give it to you because we're still installing it. So then I waited till January and sent another request, and they said, well, we can't send it to you because the structural health monitoring system is being calibrated. I thought that was odd. So if it's being calibrated, that means they're not fully operational with the system. They're not posting information online. They're not discussing results. But as I mentioned, it's a $2.7 million system. They were paid over $1.7 million for a portion of the system, and then they were paid another $564,000, and it left $431,000. And Kistler invoiced that in November of 2024. And I have records from my APRA request that show that the last remaining payments for this project, both the installation and calibration of the structural health monitoring system and the weigh in motion system, was paid in full on January 21st, 2025, based on that November 2024 invoice from Kistler. So why would they pay in full if the system's still being calibrated? I mean, you've got all these sensors across the bridge. When you calibrate it, you take a truck of known weight and you drive it across the bridge and you watch your sensor readings, and you should know, based on the size of the member that's being instrumented and the load that's being imposed, you should be able to calculate what the strain readings are and compare that to the measured strain readings. And if there's adjustments in a calibration factor that needs to be addressed, you can do it at that time. But that process shouldn't take months and months and months based on my understanding of these systems. Now, RiDOT has been having nightly lane closures on the eastbound and westbound directions of the eastbound Washington Bridge. But if you go back to Kistler's proposal, calibration was included for the weigh in motion system, and calibration was included for the structural health monitoring system. And Kistler indicates in their proposal, the bridge model requires calibration to be performed by positioning test vehicles on the bridge on specific locations temporarily with closed traffic. Kistler will perform the calibration while the client will provide the test vehicles and drivers of a known static weight. Okay, well, this is traffic cam video from 2 nights ago. As I mentioned, they've announced these lane closures, and I know some people that work at night are not happy about it. And it looks like they're doing something out there. I asked a local contact, a concerned citizen, to go out there last night if they happen to be in the area and let me know what they're doing within the lane closure areas here. Does it look like they're driving a truck, parking it, getting measurements, and moving from place to place? He said, no, the only thing he saw going on, he said there were some trucks there, but people were working on an overhead sign. That's all he saw. So my question is RiDOT using this calibration as an excuse to not provide the public with information? If it truly is still being calibrated, why did they pay for the system in full when calibration was included in the scope? And more importantly, RiDOT's own justification for purchasing this system indicated that the system was very important. So why isn't it fully operational? You've got overweight vehicles crossing daily. You've got high traffic volumes. You've got nearby demolition activity that can induce vibrations and cause disturbance to the existing bridge foundation and the superstructure. Why isn't this system fully operational, and why is it okay? If it looks like in terms of their priority, they're charging heavy fines for these overweight trucks. So they're making a lot of money off of what's going on with this weigh in motion system. But the structural health monitoring system, apparently it's okay if it lags months and months or even a year after the weigh in motion system is operational. So I'll let you decide what the implications of that could be. So I'll put a link in the description to this video. If you have information about what's going on with this project and you want to reach out to me, I hold all information sources confidential unless I'm told otherwise. So please let me know what you think is going on at this project. With that, I want to send a shout out to those of you who have contributed to Buy Me a Coffee. That's a great way to support the channel. I've spent hundreds of dollars in public records requests to support these Washington Bridge videos that I've done over these past many months. And certainly I want to send a shout out to the channel members, as well as those of you who've provided super thanks, 2 additional great ways to support the channel. As I mentioned, I'll continue to follow this story, but I'm moving on to many other interesting topics, other bridge projects, building projects, other important infrastructure projects throughout the country and the world. So please stay tuned for future videos.